Now, what I said, get out the bed. I'm your parent and you heard what I said. Anyway, Neressa told me to come up with a theme song. And before we got on the mic, yeah, you see her shaking her head. You know, she's telling her kids, get out the bed. And I'm kind of like, well, that is a metaphor for where we are 2020. In fact, and I'll tell you where I got that metaphor from in a minute. But let's just kick off the show. My name's Atiba Ellis.
I'm Nariessa Smith.
And welcome to We the People of Color podcast.
Yes, we are very happy to be here as always.
And we are here to break down the law, politics, and all the nonsense that we can fit into 60 minutes about 2020. And in fact, first of all, let me just check in. I have a question for us.
Got it. I'm listening.
On a scale of it's January and I'm relaxing and everything's fine to, oh Lord, October, how 2020 was it this week?
It's hard to say, but I'm gonna say that this week, if it wasn't peak 2020, with peak 2020 being the week with the world's craziest debate and the president getting the Rona and all of that, if that's the 2020th week of 2020, this week is slightly more chill, but not by much. A lot of crazy stuff happened this week. And just so you all know, I mean, we, of course, have jobs and things that we do, but we put time into, trying to make this show. And one of the craziest things that we have found is that, like, this week, it was going back and forth. I was telling them, I said, it was like, Vin Diesel in them. It was fast and furious because so many things happened this week that, in fact, so many things happened that it's going to be hard to talk about all of them. But it was a crazy week.
I'm sitting here and my phone's ringing and I beep. Nariessa said, read this. 15 minutes later, beep. There's another phone. 32 minutes later, beep. 47 minutes later, beep. And I'm like, I opened up my email at the end of the day and there's like 39 emails. And I'm like, what the F happened Tuesday? I mean,
exactly. Yeah. And this was, I don't even know. I stopped counting how many emails I sent because it's an insanity right now. And one of the things that, I hope we'll talk about a little bit later too, is people of color, going into this election season. And by the way, I hope everybody has voted early in the states where you are able to do so. Please take advantage of that. If you are in a state where you are able, if you're not in a state where you're able to early vote, take some time off. But please, all people of color, this is going to be a stressful it's been a stressful 5 years. I'm not even going to call it 4 because it's been stressful since that fool came down that escalator in September 2015. It's been stressful from the moment he won. It's been stressful since he was sworn in, and every day since then has just been ridiculous. So if you have already voted, take some time to do some self-care, just, for mental health reasons. All of the medical personnel agree that racism is a risk factor in the health, for people of color, and explains a lot of, racial disparities in healthcare. So
they declared racism a health crisis here in Milwaukee County, actually. Racism in and of itself. And we said we would do a whole show about that. But let's get through the election first, and then we'll start talking about some broader topics.
Absolutely, because we have to get through this election and hopefully we will get through it intact and safe and healthy and whole physically and mentally. But that's just the note for the day: is take care of yourselves, please. Please take care of yourselves.
Self-care equals healthcare, as a buddy of mine put it the other day.
Amen to that.
So, but what we will get to today, as usual, including this week in voter suppression, and we're going to have a long conversation about our big law topic of the day, federalism. And then, in honor of Halloween, and as you can tell, we're both dressed up particularly today.
Well, I didn't have my costume on. Are you ready for my costume? Hold on, I gotta get my costume.
Oh, okay. Here comes the costume. As you can see, I'm dressed Bond style in honor of the fact that, and here's another bit of 2020. It was peak 2020 this morning when I got the text that Sean Connery passed away.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm like, I was going to put on my monk robe, but instead, shout out to the OG James Bond.
Yeah, absolutely that. And Henry Jones Sr., you know, The Rock. He's been so many great movies, you know. So that's the other sad thing we were talking about, is that things that would seem sad, you know, in a normal year, but like with everyone being under so much stress with election season and Corona, it's like news that would normally just be sort of like a sad footnote is like, oh Lord, you know.
It's twisting the knife.
You know? exactly.
The election season stabbing us bad enough, but you had to twist
we got to talk about, so that's his costume. So as you guys know, there's different types of costumes. Some, you know, I basically, once you're growing, there's like 4 types of costumes. You got the sexy flirty type costume, you got the cosplay type costume, scary and comedy costumes. So I decided to go scary. I wanted to dress up as the scariest thing I could think of. Are you ready?
Oh dear.
You ready? Okay, here we go.
Ah! No!
This is my costume.
Stop!
This is my costume. So I said I wanted to be the scariest thing that I could
feel
be.
the Constitution melting for a generation. No!
Yeah, me too. I mean, and we're laughing, but this legit is no laughing matter. The things that the hardcore 5 plus Roberts sometimes are going to do to the Constitution, it is going to be ugly. It is going to be ridiculous. It is going to be it's going to be really bad. Yeah, it's going to be bad, and we need to be prepared for that. And when I do my part later, I'm going to talk about exactly what it is that we can do to fight back. Because one of the things when you study Black history, and Atiba gave his bona fides on this point in the last episode, I think, or a couple episodes back. I minored in history in college. Have always was raised in a house where it was not an option. You know, my mom legitimately used to read Before the Mayflower. Remember that one by Lerone Bennett Jr., the book you could order from Ebony. That was our bedtime stories. Like, I'm not even kidding. So being steeped in that, and now being someone who actually teaches history classes from time to time, just from a historical standpoint, we as people of color are looking down the barrel of a very, very ugly future. But the beautiful part about it is, if you study our history, you know that even in the darkest moments, people have found ways to fight back. And the other good news is that because of the people who fought before us, we have a few more tools at our disposal in our fight. So that's where we are today. Oh, wait. Before I switch, I was going to flip it back over to you, but we had some more stuff to talk about with Halloween.
We do. And I was just previewing the fact that we're going to come back to Halloween at the end of the show, and we're going to build on this scary, ugly theme at the end. But we wanted to kick off with well, first of all, we're going to kick off with, let's talk about Halloween as Halloween for a minute. But before we do, I wanted to kick it back to you for 30 seconds to remind everyone who our sponsor is for this week.
Yes. Our sponsor this week is Hot Hands. Not the game that Ellen plays on her show, but you know those pocket warmer things that you can when it's cold, right?
Right,
And you can put them
right.
in your, because Trump left them people out there for like, what was it, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours, and they were out there in the freezing cold. And part of me was thinking, these poor people. And the other part of me was like, well, if your ass is dumb enough to be out there waiting to hear this person speak, you kind of deserve it. So I don't know. But that's our sponsor for this week
Mm.
is hand warmers.
Hand warmers.
That would be
No
a good
specific
segment. Hand warmers and handmaidens.
no specific product intended to be noted here. So copyright lawyers lay off. Anyway.
Word.
So speaking of things that frighten me, let's talk about Halloween. All right. So
Yes.
right before, I mean, and this is one of the things that is very 2020, right? We can't take our kids trick or treating. We can't go out. I mean, I was driving down the road this morning, just up here in the city in Milwaukee, and there were people kind of doing their morning hikes, and they were in costume. I saw Hogwarts and witches and all this, that, and the
Aw.
other. But you know, Halloween 2020 isn't the Halloween that we want, but
Nothing about 2020 since Valentine's Day. That's the last holiday. I was
Valentine's,
talking with my
hell yeah.
daughter. That was the last normal holiday that we had, was
Well, I mean,
Valentine's Day.
for me, with being in the academy, there was spring break, but like I
Ah,
remember Thursday at like 12:43 p.m., I got the email. All right, we're shutting down. Shut it down. We're going to suspend classes for a week and then we're going virtual. And I'm like, well, that's it. And I met up with somebody for lunch Friday, and that was Friday, March 13th. Speaking of scary stuff. And then it's basically been locked down ever since, you
mhm.
know. But this gives us an opportunity to, step back for a second. And I'm going to actually step back because I'm going to bring in our guest for this topic.
I know who the guest is.
Well, actually, I need to pull him over a bit there. Oh, I'm doing it wrong. This is why you rehearse before you go live. But there's our friend, Brother T'Challa as the Black Panther. And let me get him over my other shoulder, right? Because we were talking about Halloween. Woohoo! There he is. We were talking about Halloween, and we were remembering how, what was it, a couple of years ago, everybody had Black Panther going on,
Yeah.
right?
When that movie came out, it was such a cultural touchstone. And the
I'm gonna get
story
back
that I
in the
was
seat.
sharing when we were planning the show was I was saying that every little boy that, because Black Panther came out in like February 2018, if I remember correctly. And every little boy that came to my door that Halloween that had melanin, and by that, I mean all the little Latinx boys, all the little Black boys, all the little Asian boys, everybody, every little boy was dressed as Black Panther. And it was something that I just picked up on. And I think that that's a good thing because it shows that as people of color, when there's something that makes a big deal, makes a cultural touchstone, moves things forward for one group of us, it can move the ball forward for the rest of us too. I mean, it's not happening in a vacuum, right? So I think that it is a great thing to demonstrate that, you know, and especially now that he sadly is departed, that his life, of course, it was a great touchstone for the Black community, but it was a touchstone beyond that, you know, for all people of color. And I think that it's also a time, Halloween for people of color, it can be both a happy and a sad time, because Halloween can be a time people of color get put in so many boxes unfairly.
Hmm.
You know, you're an angry Black woman, you're, you know, a mean Black man, you know, you're this, you're that, you know. And so it can be nice to have this holiday where the whole point of it is to break out of what people normally see you as, right?
Hmm.
That can be a thing. But then you got people who want to use it as a chance to be ignorant, to demean your culture. Just the other day, I saw these young white kids putting on blackface and talking about, you know, Black Lives Matter, but in a
Right.
mocking way. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just so it's that tension. It's like you can't even
Right.
have fun as a person of color without, you know, people trying to rain on your parade. It's just really sad.
Yeah. And I mean, you every year there's that somebody famous enough to get news attention dresses in blackface, and this is why we can't
A
have nice
governor, a
things.
prime minister, I'm just saying, not naming no names.
A governor, a prime minister, a son, a prince, and I don't mean Prince, but you know who I'm talking about. Just
Mm-hmm.
saying. But
I'm
but
just
this
saying.
gets but this gets into a whole other thing, right? We have all this conversation about who our heroes are, who our idols are, who should be famous, who shouldn't be famous. And by the way, getting all tuxed up and shouting out James Bond is also talking about why not Idris? Why not
Yes.
Idris as James Bond, right? And this gets into the same conversation of the kind of racist possessiveness around heroes, when actually this is about imagination and imagining how the best of humans can be, right? And
Absolutely.
you know
But
and
I
and
think, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I
I
was
thought
just
you were
going to
done.
say, because like I used to think that a lot of this stuff was just talk. I early on in my teaching career, I'm teaching race and the law, and I've got one of the most influential critical race theory readers. And I'm opening it up and I'm like, well, what is this chapter on colorism? Okay, I can see that. And then there's the sub chapter about Snow White, right? And all of White Christmas. And I'm like, oh, come on. Why mess up holidays? Why mess up this? And but then I realizing this language about whiteness and blackness, or really when we're talking about espousing and loving whiteness compared to the practice of anti-blackness, right? Where one sort of cultural milieu is deemed the norm, but the other is disparaged. I mean,
Oh, all the
and it's
time.
in the history, it's in the culture. And it took me a little while to kind of see, yeah, it really is in the culture. I mean, why does the conversation about Idris Elba being James Bond all of a sudden turn into, well, James Bond's supposed to be white? Why does, and we can go on, but you get the point.
Well, and the point that I want to make is the word you mentioned a little while ago, and this will only be for our video listeners, not our audio listeners. I have to say it the SpongeBob way: imagination. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, and you guys might wonder, what does this have to do with the law? Law and race are inextricably tied. Like they go together hand in hand. You can't separate one from the other, even going back to the Constitution, which is the foundation of all laws in this country. So that's why we're talking about this, in case you're wondering. But to go back and really bring it home, I want to tie in these threads of what we've been talking about, because, as I said, race and law go together. So if you set up a system that not just privileges whiteness, but just goes all in having very narrow definitions of who can be white. I was teaching a class this week about race in America and who gets to be white. And basically, legally, for the longest time, I mean, not Indian people, not Japanese people, not Chinese people, like none. None, none, none. This is insane that we would have this. It's insane that we would have a nation where citizenship and whiteness are legally connected. And what that means is that in the minds of so many people, when you say, oh, an American hero, that means a white hero. And what that means is that when people say, make America great again, it's make white America great again. Because when you're talking about America, you're talking about white people. Everyone who isn't white doesn't fit that mold.
So, and here's the thing, to really bring this home to the law and to get us to our weekly segment, here's the transition.
Oh, I had another point on that, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Make your point, because I want to use this as the jump.
All right, I will make the other points. And also, it has to do with the way we teach history. And again, law and history, very, very closely tied. Law and history, if you don't understand history, for instance, if you don't understand that Plessy versus Ferguson killed the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause effectively, for so long, and if you don't understand that Black folks just didn't show up, randomly, and decide willingly to work, and that Native folks just didn't say, hey, Columbus, how y'all doing? Come through. We're having a cookout, and that, the Chinese folks who came over here and built the railroads and did all of that, they were not treated well. If you take all of that together, right, and the way that people of color are portrayed in American history, if we're mentioned at all, is always as a footnote, or we are objects, not subjects, and whiteness is still prioritized. So we continue to overall get this role where, again, it's not important enough for us to matter, and that's why we have to struggle. And to bring it back all the way to Halloween, that's what gives people the license to think that, okay, well, if I'm white, I can dress up as anybody I want to, even if that's blackface. Or, I think that's also why there's so much stock put in not telling the stories about Washington being a slaveholder, Jefferson being a slaveholder and a rapist, because, part of our whole system is premised on whiteness and white maleness being prioritized and deified. And if you start questioning that, then you tear the whole system down. And shaken or stirred, Mr. Bond?
Well, shaken.
That's pretty good.
Thank you for remembering Moneypenny. But on the real tip here, and to bring it back to the present day, not just Halloween and the ability to imagine, but it's also about, this conversation we've just stumbled into. Why pass an executive order banning any conversation about critical race theory, structural racism, and the like? Because it's exactly this conversation that the Trump administration apparently doesn't want to have, because it would unearth the way that privilege keeps continuing to be replicated, whether any individual person means it or not. Right. This isn't about hating individual white people. This isn't about stereotyping or typecasting, but it's looking at the fact that the historical patterns point to all this. And we have practices that have been built into our culture for 200, 300, 400 years, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And it also underscores the point, because if we're thinking really critically about this, and you alluded to the Alien and Nationalization Act, which did not change until 1965, along with the Civil Rights Act, which overruled all that stuff about Plessy, which did not happen until 1964, or the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The reality is, America has not been a multiracial democracy for any longer than 55 years, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
if you
about right.
stop and think about that in that context, in that sense, in terms of the true, as historians call it, the second Reconstruction, that's just happening now. Compared to other nations in the world, this is still childhood.
Oh
And
yeah.
and I mean, insert joke about Trump acting like toddler here, to make the point that these are the kinds of struggles that are about who we can imagine ourselves as a country to become versus how we're acting right now. And speaking of how we're
Absolutely.
acting right now, this brings us to our weekly segment, This Week in Voter Suppression.
And as I
Now,
have to say every week, it's a doggone shame that we have anything to talk about this every week, that voter suppression is so rampant that every week there's something to talk about. And please understand, we cut down the stories, but I digress.
we had a list. We had a long list. And then we realized, the show runs are looking long. And we always go on because we just did 10 minutes on critical race theory and how it matters in terms of seeing history. And that just happened right before your very eyes. But it's insane. It's crazy, right? We've got people still trying to bomb ballot drop boxes. We have people running around with their Trump flags and their machine guns and their assault rifles trying to be all up in folks' faces. We even had a report of the Biden campaign trying to make an appearance in Austin, but there are a bunch of Trump folks in trucks, and I don't have direct evidence of it, but according to at least what I saw on Twitter, at least one Biden campaign car got pushed off the road by some of these Trump people, right? And there were staffers saying publicly that they were worried about their security. Everybody at the campaign's all right, but it's very clear that people are starting to get 2020 about all this stuff. And there are people who worry out loud about the violence and the threats and the fear of going to the ballot box Tuesday. Now, as we said last week, the fear shouldn't stop you, because there are the mechanisms to secure yourself. If you got to go vote, as Nereus has said at the top of the podcast, right? If you're going to go vote, you need to do it in person, because at this point, with what the courts have done, you can't rely on the mail to get your ballot delivered. Right?
And I just quick interjection. This ain't the time to be on CP time, y'all. Do not, if no, and we joke about this all the time. We even started podcast late once because we had technical. I'm telling you, this ain't the time to be on CP time. Whether it's whatever the C is for you, whether it's Chinese people time, Chicano time, colored people time, just don't be on it.
Or even Caucasian people time, whatever that is.
Yes, whatever it is. Nope, don't be on CP time. Get out there and vote on time, and make sure that you are there. Be prepared. So sorry about that.
And most states, the polls close somewhere between 7 and 8 p.m. It depends on what state you're in, obviously, but you got to be on time, in line by that time. Now, the law says if you're online by that time, you are entitled to get in and vote. And the law says that if you need assistance, you're entitled to ask for it and to receive it. So, show up if you haven't voted already. We need everybody. And Lord knows we need people of color to get out and vote. I mean, and by the way, I'm just going to take a minute. And in fact, when we come back to our favorite topic, Black conservatives who support Trump, because actually, let me put it this way. It's fine to be a Black conservative. I have no problem with that. But the running argument of this podcast has been, in part, that Trump is an existential threat to people of color. Just plain and simple. Trying to make 2020 look like 1920. Now,
1820, bruh.
Or well. So but we need to save some time for that. We're going to put that in the next segment or towards the end. But there's one thing that I want to talk about in terms of this week in voter suppression, right? Lots of nonsense happening in fits and pieces. Though, to be clear, the upside of all this is that, what is it? How many million people have voted right now?
Hold on. You talk, I'll look it up. But millions.
Yeah,
we're coming close in a lot of states to surpassing 2016 levels.
Right. I think we already have here in Wisconsin, we've already passed the total number of people who voted in 2016. People are showing up. Notwithstanding all these pockets of intimidation and violence and just craziness, the truth of the matter is the election is proceeding as designed, and the administrators of this election have had to put it together in a way they did not expect, but it's happening, right? But what
by the way, Michael McDonald, sorry, not that Michael McDonald,
no,
but the elections guy, as of yesterday, I guess was just, and this is from the BBC, it was 85 million people, which is way more than all of the early votes that were cast in 2016. So we've already passed that. And the highest number is in California. Next is Texas. Texas has already surpassed all the votes that were cast in total. And Florida is at 7.8 million. And the number of people who've early voted so far is 62% of the entire 2016 total.
So we're basically close to already getting to 2 out of 3 people and have shown up more in terms of early voting. And there's going to be turnout on election day. And at the end of the day, as a scholar of the law of democracy, I got to say, this is actually all a good thing. But then we look at the courts and talk about how a good thing may well end up being twisted in a way that's not going to help us. At the end of the day, when it comes down to democracy, it's about letting the people decide. The nickname for our episode this week is "The People Strike Back," right? And but to me, what this means at a minimum is that all votes need to be counted. All votes need to be counted. All votes rightly cast. So,
and what does your boy, Pretty Boy, have to say about letting all the votes be counted?
He's not my boy. He's your boy.
That's your boy.
Nah. But who we're talking about is Brett Kavanaugh, right? So there was a flurry of decisions this week from the Supreme Court, which basically went this way. Like, the Supreme Court has been doing what it's been doing ever since the pandemic started, which was basically brushing off federal courts, telling federal judges, no, you can't mess with elections. And I've talked about the Purcell principle at length in earlier podcasts. But the idea, of course, is federal courts, federal law. The Supreme Court has been telling lower court judges, no, you can't mess with the rules because it's too close to the actual election. Now, it's been inconsistent, and I could go on for 20 minutes about how this thing that seemingly makes sense doesn't make sense. But I want to zoom in on one particular opinion, which is sort of the reverse of all of it. You remember last week we talked about Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Well, it came up again, right? Your girl, Amy Handmaid Barrett, got sworn in, and then the GOP in Pennsylvania tried again to get the newly installed 9-person court with the 6-3 conservative majority to rehear the case. Now, the court decided, 5-3, because apparently Justice Barrett did not participate.
She said she hadn't had a chance to review the information.
Well, so, okay, cool. I mean, that's a good first decision. Not going to fault her with that. But at least 5 justices said, no, we're not going to mess with this Pennsylvania state court decision made by the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court on Pennsylvania law. And in fact, shout out to the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said back in April, much love to RBG. But she made the point back in April, courts don't do this. Federal courts don't mess with state law. And she made the point all the way back in Bush v. Gore, 2000, where we all remember the Supreme Court ended up stepping in 5-4, stopping the count in Florida and basically giving the election to Bush over Al Gore. So, Kavanaugh objects to all this and writes this opinion, which was riddled with errors. And just look it up. It isn't just me. There are all kinds of people who are saying you got this wrong.
This isn't our liberal bias. This is the fact that we've both been law clerks. We've both written law review articles. We know how to cite the stuff.
We work for judges, and we know how judges demand things be cited. But this opinion by Kavanaugh, he's got to correct it now because he got wrong about states who have changed their voting laws in light of the pandemic. He got wrong. In particular, his claim that the election is done on election day. No, it's not. The vote counting happens on election, starting election day and going forward. And in fact, it depends on what state you're in. Some states have already been counting ballots coming in absentee or by mail. And then other states like Wisconsin don't start counting until election day. States also have deadlines as to when to get the counting done and a mechanism to correct errors. And then that gets reported to the electors in the Electoral College. And then the electors in the Electoral College then report that to Congress. And then Congress certifies the election, which is when it's done. But you know when that happens?
In January.
And then the president's sworn in January 20th. This is all laid out in the Constitution, in the Presidential Succession Act, 3 U.S.C. 5, and in state law. But Kavanaugh said, oh, these states want the election done on election day. CNN's just projecting. Fox News is just using polls and sampling to guess, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so real facts, and we all have to be ready for, if it's close, not knowing who wins the presidency for days or maybe a week or two until all this process that I've just described gets done. But the thing to watch out for is that Kavanaugh shouted, in his opinion, to Bush v. Gore. And
that's like just so y'all know, that would be like if you were a referee, and you had to, have a game between the best basketball team of all time, being the Detroit Pistons, versus the worst basketball team of all time, that is based in Chicago, and the ref comes out with a Michael Jordan shirt on, or he's giving shout outs to Michael Jordan. There's nothing good about this, listeners. Nothing good at all.
Right. So we'll get to nightmare scenarios in a bit, but I just wanted to lay out these facts to say that the law says federal courts shouldn't go mess with state court decisions, which are found on state law. But Kavanaugh, he apparently isn't feeling that. And that could turn into a whole bunch of mess down the road. But my entire talk about all this is basically built on this concept called federalism. And so we're now at our next segment of Let's Talk Law. And I'm going to let Neriessa talk about what I mean when I say federalism.
All right, y'all. And I'm sorry, I know we're not to our doomsday part of the show yet, but it's rough stuff out there. And happy to talk to folks about it as always, for sure. Because that's why we do this. But it's sad to think that, we could be on the brink. But this is what I was speaking to Atiba, and Atiba, he just went through it, but I will ask him again, regardless, to correct me if he thinks that I am wrong, because I definitely see a trend in these court cases that the Supreme Court has been deciding or deciding not to take from the states. And the common thread seems to be, with that exception of what he was just talking about with that Kavanaugh case, is that they want to leave state law alone. Right? Would you agree with that, Atiba?
What?
That they want to leave state law alone for the most part.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that being said, what that means for people of color is, with this new court, we are going to have to make sure that we just show up and vote every year. It can't just be presidential election years. One of the reasons why we are in the situation in which we find ourselves is turnout varies from year to year to year. The highest election turnout tends to be in the leap years with the presidential elections. That's the high turnout. I guess people think that the president, is all powerful. The president can do anything, so it doesn't matter. Then, so let's say maybe
Aquaman.
Exactly. I was coming back to Aquaman. I'm not there yet, but every time people say, well, I vote and I voted for the president, let's say, I'm making these numbers up to make it easier, but let's say 75% of the people who vote in presidential elections are people of color. Let's just say that. I'll just throw that out there. It's not correct, but I'll just throw it out there to make the math easy. Then in these off-year elections where a president is not being elected, it can drop to maybe 35, 40%. And that is how we get Republican control of state legislatures. That is how we get Republican control of state courts. That is how we get Republican control of municipal boards and things, because they will do it in off years or off seasons, because there's no rule that says the only important elections happen in November. Some cities and states have primaries in March, but sometimes it's the real deal. So that is the case. And what we are trying to do is to make sure that everyone understands this. So if you hear nothing else from today's show, understand this concept of federalism. Federalism is just a fancy lawyer word that says that the federal government gets to make its laws, but state laws that don't conflict with those laws get to stand. And the state laws on elections, the Supreme Court has decided again and again that elections are one of the places where state laws are superior. So states get to make their laws on what kind of ballots to use. Remember in Florida with all the hanging chads, and states get to decide whether you have early voting or not. States get to decide whether you can register before your 18th birthday. States have a ton of power here, a ton of power. And if we want to protect our rights, not just the right to vote, but I'll get to that in a second, to protect our votes, to protect our rights in the future, it is going to be key that people of color turn out and vote in every single election. I don't care if it's for president, dog catcher, comptroller. Nobody even knows what a comptroller is, but that's okay. Show up and vote for the comptroller anyway. Go ahead, make sure you are there, show up and vote. They are counting on you not to show up in these off-year elections. So if you hear someone in your life, particularly a young person, saying, oh, well, I already voted because I voted for the president, I voted for Biden, say, okay, good job, welcome to the club. Now, get ready to vote in March for this city council, get ready to vote in November for this sheriff, get ready to vote, in May 2020, for whatever, get ready to vote in November 2020 for Congress. This is a thing. What's going on now is so bad. We are really headed toward something that could be really bad. And we might survive it. It's one of those horrible things where we have ways to survive, but if we take our foot off the gas, we won't make it. We got to keep that pressure. Having even one more Republican president in the next 20 years could be horrible for people of color. And some of the other things that the federal courts let stand, criminal law, as long as it doesn't violate the Fourth Amendment. So as long as some states not saying, oh yeah, by the way, let's go knock on people's houses without warrants. They get to make up all kinds of rules about how the jails get to be, again, as long as it doesn't violate the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. It was the states who got to decide during this pandemic whether to release prisoners. States get to decide whether to use a death penalty. This is just in criminal law. I'm thinking of stuff. States get to decide and cities get to decide about body cams and other policies. They get to decide how to punish people. This is important stuff, y'all. And this is all stuff that's decided at the local level. And one of the big things that's decided at the local level, I cannot stress this enough. The school to prison pipeline is real. Kids of color, because they're more likely to go to public school, are more likely to get pushed into the school to prison pipeline. And if you don't vote for a school board or superintendent, I mean, you're basically saying you don't care about the people who make these decisions. Heck, even the tax assessor. I just saw an article my mom sent me earlier this week saying that people of color pay more in property taxes. Why? It can be easy for us to think, oh man, nothing ever changes. Well, part of the reason why we've had such a hard time is people have seen a little bit of progress, taken their foot off the gas and been like, oh yeah, we can coast. No coasting. We must keep our foot to the pedal. We have to vote in every election, which is not that I'm saying don't protest too. Yeah, do that too. But you could protest and shout all day long if you want to. You think Bunker Boy cares? He'll just tear gas you. The point
So,
of protesting works better when you have politicians there who will at least listen to you.
you
Randall.
know, the heart of this is that there is no substitute for controlling the means of exercising political power, right? Protesting matters because that calls attention to the injustices.
Yeah.
Writing, and in fact, remember the right to protest, the right to petition your government is protected in the Constitution. They can't take that away from you, right?
Yeah.
And because you're the government is supposed to hear us. So, but our point here is that a lot of the decisions about our day-to-day lives are made on the state level, are made on the local level, and that it is that
Yeah.
might affect you more. Rarely do people get to the Supreme Court, but you sure do know who the local police is. You know who the county sheriff is, or like you said, the tax
Absolutely.
assessor. And oh, by the way, can I just point out, I know what a comptroller is.
See, it's always got to be one. I'm trying to point out to the people that even if they don't know, they still got to go vote. Okay, of course. A
Now,
comptroller is someone who handles money and stuff like that. And we know that. But the point is, if you don't know what a certain office is, do your research. And there's all kinds of great organizations. If you're not sure, find a local organization you trust and see which candidates they are endorsing, right? And usually,
right.
there'll be a place and they'll say, oh, okay, here are the people we endorse, for these offices. If you're not sure, if you don't have time to research all
But
of them.
there is no substitute for casting an informed vote and holding your government accountable. And our point in talking about federalism is that it's not just the federal government, it's the state government too. But we, the people of color, have the power to hold our government accountable.
Yes, we absolutely do. And if I may, and this might segue into something else we were going to talk about, it upsets me so much when I hear young African American people in particular every time, well, I don't understand why I have to vote and I don't care that people fought or died. First of all, don't ever tell me that you don't care about the people who fought and died for your rights. Our ancestors gave too much. So that we would have things better and we would have options. And are things still really jacked up right now? Yeah, they are. Are they as jacked up as they were in 1935 when people were getting lynched and white folks were doing this with impunity? Is it wrong that police are killing us? Yes, but random everyday white people were doing it then and had no fear of being prosecuted at all. Yes, I know Ahmaud Arbery was killed by some random white people, but the people who did it are facing charges.
Well,
That
in
didn't happen in 1935.
1935, they would make it a party, right?
Yes,
I
exactly.
mean, the difference between then and now is the culture of the 1920s and 30s was so in the open and
Yeah,
so established the white community. And in fairness, all that protest and campaigns to change the law led to a change of the law, and they led to a change of the culture, right?
yeah,
America did become a multiracial government and society in 1965 in a genuine sense. But the
yeah.
forces of the ideology are still moving. And like I said before, when we were talking about Halloween, the practices and the patterns still replicate themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, and I
Amir,
understand that.
Tamir,
Yeah, and
all
I
the
want.
brothers and
Yeah.
sisters, including, you know, Miss Taylor's shooter who did not get indicted. But did you see how the cop is now?
Oh, you done broke your headphones. Oh
Thing.
Lord.
I broke my own. I got so
You
angry.
got so mad you
I
broke your headphones.
I got so mad. I broke my headphones.
Black rage is real, y'all. Go ahead, let it out, bro.
But the cop is suing her brother for causing him, the
I
police
saw that.
officer,
I saw
emotional
that.
distress.
And think
Now,
about
ain't
how
that
much
some
privilege.
mess?
Yeah. Yes. Uh think about
Even
how
my
much
cat's in here
privilege.
yelling about it.
Think about how much privilege you have to wake up in the morning and say, yeah, I'm going to kill somebody. I ain't in jail. I should be somewhere thanking God that I'm not in jail. But instead, I'm going to sue somebody. Now, going back to what we said before about how whiteness is normalized and deified, like whiteness is put on a pedestal, that's the example of how dare you think. Meanwhile, if you were a black person, and you have the temerity to even try to defend yourself, like remember Marissa Jackson down in Florida, she was a victim of domestic violence. She fired a warning shot and she was arrested. Saying all of this to say, before we get to our final segment, because I do want us to do this, but I wanted to make this point. The point that I wanted to make was I understand all of y'all who are frustrated. I get it. But Dr. King once said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That is true. And if you live long enough, especially if you're young, especially if you study history, and you see, yes, some of the things we can draw parallels. Oh, we can absolutely draw parallels and we can see how things play out. But the fact that we are able to sit here and freely talk and organize and mobilize, our ancestors could not do that. Like they literally could not. The fact that we can read and address the world and that we have the audacity to even be able to think that we might be able to change some things, that's not a luxury our ancestors had. So we need not throw that away. And, it's a difference between being literally helpless and not having many tools to change your situation to having tools that could be used to change your situation and choosing not to use them because they're not the tools you wish you had. Use the tools that you've been given. Give the next generation better tools. But don't say that other generations before you didn't do anything when you refuse to use everything that they literally fought, sweat, marched, and died for.
Well, and to
Rant
that
over.
point, I do love the idea, right? It gets me up every morning that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But like you just said, it bends only to the extent that we push it.
Exactly. And if I
Right.
can just add right quick, the whole story of America, it starts as a country founded by slaveholders. There were only like, I looked into this recently and I can't remember the numbers, but like, I think something like 75% of people that signed the Declaration or that signed the Constitution had slaves, something like that. It's a ridiculously high number, right? Look at that. That is not justice right there, right? That's not justice. However, the reason why things are different today, it's not because some white man woke up one day and said, oh, I think America should be fair. Women have the right to vote because women got out there and said they deserve the right to vote. Black people had the right to vote because Black people fought and marched and died on that Edmund Pettus Bridge and in other places. LGBT folks got rights not because they were like, please, sir, can I have some more? No, they went out and stonewall. They fought. They protested. The only way this country has ever moved the needle toward justice is because people pushed it to do so. But I also have to add, all those changes wouldn't have mattered if there weren't people in positions of power who were able to put lasting changes into effect. Protest brings the issues to light. Politics brings those issues into permanence, right? They protested years ago to take down those white and colored signs, passed a law, gone. They protested to get the Voting Rights Act. We're still fighting for some things. Yeah, but we have a framework because they gave it to us. All I'm saying is in life, few things are perfect. Use what you have to make things work. Leave the next generation better tools. But don't disrespect my ancestors. That's what I'm saying.
So we got to get ready. We're now in stoppage time, right? As they say in soccer.
We've been past stoppage time. We in overtime.
well, however you want to put it, overtime, stoppage time. So here's the overtime question, right? So to bring it all back to Halloween and scariness, right? Yeah, yes. You realize how anyway. So the point is this election's not a done deal, right? The numbers say it's going to come down to the swing states yet again. And as we have talked about today in this podcast, it could well be another goes to the Supreme Court to make the decision. And
Lord, don't let that happen.
Please don't. And we need everybody to vote their conscience and vote what is best for them, their families, and their communities in order to have the decision. But but this raises the question, though, if it's tight and we end up with 4 more of DT, what scares you about that?
Other than having to look at his ugly face, and listen to his barely correct spelling and stuff on Twitter, I think the thing that scares me the most, and I know this is going to seem like it's just coming from a lawyer, but I got to say, looking at what happened to the Supreme Court already and seeing as how Justice Souter is not that young, all of these things, and seeing as how Amy Coney Barrett is only 29 years old or however young she is, seeing the complete damage that, and by the way, I know she's not 29. I'm just making an exaggeration about how young she is because she's ridiculously young.
That's the thing. She's like our
48.
age.
That's right. Your age. I am not 48. I'm 29. I'm claiming that. But so the point being, though, it's very sad to think about what's going to happen with the courts if Trump is reelected. Not just the big court, the Supreme Court, but the lower federal courts. I don't know if you got this headline, T, but I didn't have a chance to email this one to you because I think we might have already been on the phone. But a new report from the Washington Post just today saying that the judges appointed by Trump are more likely to rule in favor of voter suppression laws. Mm-hmm. And we don't need that, folks. People of color work hard enough, live shorter life. We don't need to make our lives harder. And if we let me just explain very quickly one little thing. The Supreme Court is the biggest court, but I think I said this in the last podcast. They don't hear every case. So there are 11 smaller circuits, and yes, to the lawyers that are listening, I know there's more than 11, but 11
regional
main other circuits. These are regional courts based on geography that hear these cases, right? And if the Supreme Court doesn't hear it, what they say gets to stand. So what Trump has been doing is they have been aggressively, him and the old age mutant Ninja Turtle McConnell, they've been aggressively packing these appellate courts. And in the hopes that the Supreme Court won't hear their decisions. So that's what's going on. If we get another 4 years of Trump, that means everyone that Clinton appointed is probably going to be retired or senior status. The folks that Obama appointed won't be able to hang on much longer. It'll just be a bunch of Trump appointees, who are mostly fresh out of law school, as young as possible. And they're going to put them on the court and they'll have lifetime appointments. And that's the thing. That's one of the things that scares me. What's one of the things that scares you, sir?
So you mentioned voting. Let me say specifically, you know, whether it's the courts or whether the attorney general in a second Trump administration, they're going to find every way possible of taking apart Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, as we've talked about before, you know, like like I've said in this podcast, you know, it was the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that made this country actually a democracy because it protects the right to vote for people of color. So, Section 5 in Shelby County, we've already talked about how that was taken apart long before even anybody seriously thought that someone like Donald Trump would run for office. But in another Trump administration, I mean, a lot of the Voting Rights Act is administered by the Department of Justice, and their priorities can flip and change. And it's all of a sudden about investigating the voter suppression of white people and investigating how minorities are abusing, you know, white people. And basically there are those who simply don't believe that there should be a Voting Rights Act or that it should be the narrowest interpretation possible, right? All you hear about cases about gerrymandering, you hear about cases about changing structures. No, there are folks out there who want protecting the right to vote for people of color simply to be about if you got denied your vote and some governmental official said it was because of your race. But the game is much bigger than that. And by getting rid of the Voting Rights Act, you get rid of all of the voice that is protected for and the space that we can use to vote. That's my nightmare.
Yeah, I got another one though.
Oh,
Uh-huh. Are you ready?
yeah.
The other thing that makes me scared is honestly, and I know a lot of people of color are feeling this, is the threat of violence. People are really scared now. And I even saw this article again earlier this week, and it was talking about they're buying guns and they're not the people that you think. And it was a bunch of people of color in the uh, piece that it was a video article and from a news source, and they were talking about this. And it's sad that people have to think like that. And I am a person who does not care for guns at all, not a big fan or advocate of guns. But in 2020, in this climate in which we find ourselves, I understand why people of color would like to think, especially those who might live in heavily, Trump favoring areas. There's already been reports of, there was this white guy earlier this week. Gosh, what state was it? It was Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, somewhere like that. But he went and plowed his truck through this neighborhood and ran down the fences and then ran over the Biden signs. But what got me about it was that this was a white guy, but he specifically went to a black neighborhood to do this. Didn't hurt any people, but that property destruction, it's just stuff like that. It makes you wonder what people are ramping up to. And then if Orange Julius should happen to lose, and because he talks so reckless, to use the proper legal term, because he talks so reckless and talks out of both sides of his mouth, would he exhort his supporters to violence? And would a lot of that violence be directed towards people of color? That's something that I worry about. I don't worry about it for myself that much, but I worry about it for other people of color. We've already seen, we were talking as we prepared for the show, we've seen Asian Americans, people attacking them, yelling at them, threatening them because they think they have coronavirus just because they're Asian. We already know that, people who are, Black tend to get attacked, in hate crimes and things at high levels. So it's sort of like this low, it's not like a loud dread, but it's sort of like a low hum. That's something that I think is a very real fear. I do think. What about you? I took one more, so you get to get one more.
So I deeply worry about I write about the right to vote. I mean, at the end of the day, I do this because I believe in the democracy and I believe in democratic promise, right? Not that we've fulfilled that promise, but we've been working at it. And, does the American state trend more towards autocracy instead of democracy, right?
Yeah.
We've over the last 4 years have seen this culture of the strong man, Trump, and sort of having that projected on us as
been a lot of writing about that. Yeah.
He is this guy. And I mean, the reality is that he's a washed up talk show host who's broke,
Mm-hmm.
and that a lot of this is propping up kind of these notions of who we're supposed to be. And what I mean by that is, and it gets all the way back to what we said at the beginning of the podcast, right? Who are supposed to be our heroes? Who are supposed to be the focus for our society? And what's most important, that each American as an individual gets the opportunity to determine for themselves who they wish to be. And yet we get this image of Trump, or you're an enemy of the state, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get this, the press is the enemy of the state. The people who disagree with him publicly are enemies of the state. The folks then say, oh, we'll get it right. And then, oh, we need to make America great again. But I'm kind of like, wait a second. Trump's had America for 4 years. Where are we now? And where are we headed?
Yeah. Yeah, he's running a weird campaign like he's not the incumbent. Like, America, there will be wildfires and racial protests if Joe Biden is elected. Fool, this is happening when you were in charge. No.
Right.
Yeah.
And in a way,
I'm sorry, I don't want to compare. It's like if you ever worked a job when you were growing up or like whatever, and you have a shift work and there's a shift that changes. If the people on the first shift didn't do the stuff and then you guys come in on the second shift, it's like, wait a second, y'all didn't do all of this. Donald Trump is trying to clock out of his shift, complaining about what Biden hasn't done, and he hasn't even clocked in yet, but he's about to leave him a big old mess. Go ahead. Sorry.
And claiming that the mess was created by Obama, even though the restaurant was making a mad profit when it was Obama's shift. So, but this gets into something deeper, right? It's like, autocrats and dictators only emerge when we actually get convinced not to believe the truth. The facts are out there. And in a way, voting for Trump is taking the facts as given. Now, as a scholar of democracy, I'm just saying that's everybody's choice. But what we've been doing in this podcast is kind of putting the facts out there and putting our opinions out there to be a voice of saying, no, everything's not all right. We need to shift. We need to change. But even that ability, if it goes away, then all of the power to bend that arc of the universe goes away.
Exactly. Exactly. And if I can just, maybe this will be the thought to close us out. uh, Two thoughts, and this is actually something, this is both. It's something that scares me and goes to what you were saying about democracy, which I think is a really good point. Of all the points that you've made, I think the point that you made that America really is not a 200-some-year-old democracy, it's really only a 55-year-old democracy because we just started letting everybody vote and participate. And because of that, we're all trying to navigate this. But to really bring it home, to build on what you just said about not knowing the truth, it goes back to what I said a minute ago, and what you said also about Trump's 1776 committee. Learning Black history, Chicano history, Asian American history, women's history, any of it is dangerous because it threatens that myth of the all-powerful white male. And we cannot delude ourselves that part of the reason why Trump did not succeed in 2016, and part of the reason why he could eke out a victory this year, and why it should stun any of us that he has more than 20% support anywhere in this nation, is because America has never dealt with its racial demons. Never. Never has it dealt, really. I mean, there's been apologies for different things. There were apologies for the Japanese internment. There were apologies for the Trail of Tears. Clinton apologized when he was in Africa for the slave trade, didn't apologize to the people who ended up here, but apologized to the people over there. But apologies don't mean that much. Checks mean a lot more, but we can come to that when we do an episode about reparations. I digress. But to get to my fear about this is that uh, win or lose, the way the media is set up now is a perfect storm to encourage more types of dismissal of people of color. Part of the reason why Trump's able to hang on is because he has a literal whole media channel devoted to just this kind of thing, to perpetuating lies about people of color and doing all of those things. So as long as Fox News and these other outlets push it and people accept it, that's going to be a fight. And that is something that scares me, to think about all these people who are out there who really don't have a clue and are being manipulated, to believe these horrible things, which is not to say that I think that they're victims, because I think you have a choice. But I also think that the people who are holding the puppet strings should be held more accountable than the little racist marionettes that
So,
they're controlling.
and with all that said, and I agree with it, I think we can end on a note, a very simple note of hope. Our hope is in the vote. Our hope is in the vote. And the ability, and in a way, that's how people of color have survived in this country, through building alliances and through finding that way through, so that a political majority and a majority that is about the morality of equality can come together. We can still do that. And that possibility has not been foreclosed from us. So our hope is in the vote.
Yeah. And this is a dark time, but there are ways out. But nearly all of those ways out are connected to having people in power who care about what America looks like for people of color. So take your Black ass out there and vote. Take your brown self out there and vote. Everybody go vote.
Well, we'll see what happened on Tuesday, and we'll be back next week to talk about it. I'm Atiba Ellis.
I'm Nariessa Smith.
And we'll see you next week.
All right. Take care, y'all.